Om Sahanā-Vavatu, Bhunaktu, Saha Vīryam Karavā-vahai, Tejas Vinā Vadhīta Mastu, Vidvishā-Vahai. Om Shānti, Shānti, Shāntihi. On below Sri Sivananda Saraswati ki, for all the saints and sages of all the traditions. Jai. Hari Om Tat Sat. Okay, we pick up in chapter 8. Where we closed. Oh, you leave it? Yeah, just for airflow. Where we closed on Wednesday morning. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Never mind. Where we closed on Wednesday morning was this discussion of avoiding thoughts of another person's defects and what that does. So,
Yes.
yeah. Good one. That's a good practice. And the discussion was centering around, and good discussion, we draw on some of the Kena Upanishad teaching in as well, which is that the mind takes the form of whatever is being contemplated. And that will sound, we'll hear that in different ways, of course, depending upon conditioning of the mind and depending upon our experience. But our experience tends to be very limited. We, in spite of the fact that the object that you're seeing or that you imagine that you're seeing only really exists in your mind, or you could say that you don't have any idea whether it has any existence outside of your mind, other than as some electrical impulse of some sort, which can be directly into the brain. So look at this Maya. Look at it, because the feeling is that it's a thing outside, but you don't know that. Because everything that you're dealing with about it is in the mind. Taste is reliant upon the sense, organ of smell and taste, right? And then in the mind is a pattern about the preferred tastes and what kind of tastes we like. Yeah, it's not outside. It's not in the tea itself. The cup, at some other sense it's clay, but at some other sense we don't know what it is because if we understand the way the eye and the mind are working together, we can see that even if there is an orange cup outside, that orange cup has to be reconstructed in the mind, even if it exists outside. So we come to see that it really is true that whatever we think upon, the mind becomes that. So if you think upon an object, such as a cup or tea or something like this, the mind becomes it, and that's how you experience it. Soul, that's how you experience it. Yes? In spite of all of the feelings and all the ideas and all of the notions that it's something outside, you don't know about that. You just know that what you're experiencing is in the mind. And in the same way, whatever thought is being entertained, the mind becomes that. The mind takes on that shape. And so that anger or that judgment of someone else's defects, whatever it is that's being contemplated in the moment, the mind has taken on that energetic shape. And as a result of that and the principle of mind, what we see is when it takes on a particular shape, it has a tendency to take that shape more and more often. Yes? And so habits are cutting grooves, as it were, in the Chitta Akasha, the mind stuff. And the propensity continues. So anger leads to more anger. But the experience of the soul is simply anger. And then the experience changes to something else. So the soul, I am experiencing what this mind has taken the shape of. So in that concept, if we can see that, then we say, oh my God, whenever I judge someone, I'm really judging myself. And I'm creating or strengthening this tendency to continue to do. And what I'm experiencing in that moment is judgment. I want to experience something different, but what I'm experiencing in that moment is that judgment. And then in the same way, if we catch that, he goes from that to the last thought determining the next birth, which is very interesting. Again, if we relate to the mind taking the shape, whether it's an emotion, a feeling, a thought, an object, you see, these are all objects for you. They're not different. There's some idea that they're different. Well, this is a cup and hatred is hatred. But really, they're the same. The hatred is also a form. It's also a vibration, right? Yeah. So it's also a form. In that way, it's not different from cup or any other form. Some forms that can be contemplated upon will lead you up. Some forms will lead you down. But if we can erase this barrier called death and the one called birth, and we can see life as a continuum, as a continuation, then whatever grooves are being cut would continue. Right? And from that perspective, so we would have, and the first time I heard the concept is with this Western mind, the first time I heard the concept, it's like, okay, something magically is going to propel you into a new birth based on the thoughts of the last birth, because it sounds like that's what's being said. But no, you yourself will propel yourself. You yourself will continue along the same vein. Right? So he says, the last thought of a man determines the future destiny. The last thought, Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, whosoever at the end abandoneth the body, thinking upon any being, to that being only he goeth, O Panteya, because of the constant thought of that being. So, and how could that be? Well, the mind becomes the thing. The mind is the thing. So this body, and we've taken a little bit of time with this, and this can be freaky stuff for us when we're first exposed to it, but this body also exists in the mind.
We have become this body because we're thinking about body too much, I guess.
Well, you don't even become that body. The mind, as it were, and the body are one. Right? So, we were discussing, and did we have this conversation? Ramana Maharshi and Nataraj and Jules and Dao should be back for a couple of hours or a few hours today, passing through. They should visit. But Nataraj had asked this question a couple of weeks ago, in the morning, because in Thought Power we were discussing the relationship between health, physical health, mental health, the relationship between physical health and mental health. And Swami Sivananda says that the mental disease is the disease of the first order, the physical disease is the disease of the second order. That it's possible to work on the mental disease with the body, so such as physical diet can help the mind, the mental dis-ease, but that really the physical dis-ease is the second order, and it's coming from the mental dis-ease. And so we use the example of Ramana Maharshi, because he had asked, is it really so that if the mind is at peace, if it's samadhi, if the mind is balanced, equanimous, and undisturbed in any scenario, undisturbed, how is it that curing of the mental disease, how is it that it cures the physical disease, the disease of the body? So the body has cancer. So we use the example of Ramana Maharshi. And Ramana Maharshi would never have, were we having this discussion? Yes. Ramana Maharshi would never have said that he had cancer. That was exclusively the province of the devotees who said he had cancer. And even today, if they were here, they would say, of course he had cancer. You could see it all through his body. But he didn't see that he had a body because his mental disease was cured. He no longer identified with it. He allowed to be the body as it is, which is a conglomeration of the 5 elements, or an organization of the 3 gunas, or the vital airs, or right? Or Brahman. Depending upon how you think about it. And that's all it meant. All that it is how you think about it. So everyone's entitled to their thoughts. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. We'll all say, well, it's this, it's this, it's this. But we're putting our own mental state upon the object, which the other person is relating to in a different way. And so in that way, yeah, he would never have said, I have cancer. And then when the devotees ask him, oh, Bhagavan, please don't leave us. And they're crying. He smiles and says, where could I go? And so that the thought has determined, the nature of the thoughts alone have determined what this is and what this is.
So the first thought's sort of thinking about something. Like if I start thinking about the body, whatever I'm thinking about. Does that make sense, the question? The first thought? Or is it before that? Is it the ego sense? Or
it's the underlying thought nature. The background, which we'll talk about right now. It says, Lord Krishna says in the Gita, whoever constantly thinks of me, capital M, which means the transcendent, the highest, even in form, intensely and with one pointed mind, to such steadfast yogan, I am easily attainable, and having thus reached me and merged in me, he's not born again in the fleeting world of woe and misery, O Arjuna. While all the worlds created by Brahma are limited by time and have their moment of dissolution on reaching me, there is no rebirth. Therefore, at all times, meditate on me, the supreme Vasudeva, and with mind and intellect fixed on me, doubtless you will attain me. It says the constant practice of fixing the mind on the Lord, although a man is engaged in worldly pursuits, will enable him to intuitively and automatically think of the Lord even at the time of his departure. The Lord says, with the mind thus engaged in the yoga of constant practice, not deflected by any other objects, one attains the supreme Purusha of resplendent glory. The Lord further says, at the time of death, he who thinks of my real being as the supreme Lord Krishna or Narayana leaves the body and verily reaches my being. Doubt this not. In whatever form a man thinks of me at the time of death, that form he attains, that form again being the result of nourishing that thought in a particular groove and by constant meditation of the same. Now, when we hear this, do we remember which of these are forms of Krishna? Or which of these are the forms of the Lord?
All of them.
All of them? Okay. So whichever form of the absolutes we're meditating upon, to that we shall attain. Lord further says, he who further establishes his mind on me, even at the time of forthgoing, and who is in that divine state of renouncing everything and of dwelling in Brahman or Brahmic state, he is free from delusion. He who has a strong habit, and then Swami Sivananda gives examples that deal with your question. It's not random. And this is what he'll share. In other words, it's not, there's the story. I didn't even read the story this time about thinking of someone's son, Narayana. There are these stories, but those stories can't be counted upon because we are experiencing, yes? Are we experiencing? So we can agree, if we really look, we can agree that we're experiencing what is arising in the mind. And that we have the power to choose what will arise in the mind. And what we contemplate and what we harbor and what we entertain and all that, we have power to choose. Otherwise, why read and study this book? Yes? So Purushartha we have. We can also come to recognize we're not that, which is arising in the mind, that that's an experience, not what we are. And there's a pattern to it. Prior choices have crafted the current thought nature. Yes? Prior choices have crafted the current thought nature. And current choices craft the future thought nature. So an action reap a tendency, so a tendency reap a habit, so a habit reap a character, so a character reap a destiny. And so it's not, and by the way, we're talking about experience. The experience of leaving the body is quite traumatic, you know, from your experience, where it was replicated for you as an experience. Yeah. The experience of departing the body is quite traumatic. And it can bring forward, it can push buttons and bring forward triggers. Yeah, if they're not resolved. Yeah. And so what happens is in trauma, we tend to go to the background state of the mind. Right? So if that background state of the mind is anger, for example, then we tend to go there. If it's fear, we tend to go there. If it's attaining to something, in other words, greed or lust or something like this, if the background state is this, then we tend to go there. So this is what Swami Sivananda talks about now. He says, he who has a strong habit of using snuff, do we know what snuff is? Okay. In his life, imitates the act of snuffing with his fingers when he's in the unconscious state just before leaving the body. So strong is the habit of snuffing in this man. The last thought of a licentious man will be the thought of a woman, or vice versa. The last thought of an inveterate drunkard will be that of the peg of liquor. The last thought of a greedy moneylender will be that of the money. The last thought of a fighting soldier will be that of shooting his enemy. The last thought of a mother who's intensely attached to her only son will be that of her son only. So relating to the background. The last thought determines the next birth. The last prominent thought of one's life occupies the mind at the time of death. It's not about the stories. It's about what is the predominant thought. What is the predominant idea? And that leads into discussion of background nature of the thought, which is here. I'll share experience. So background means what's underlying in the mind, in the mental equipment. What is it that's underlying all of the activity, the mental activity and physical activity? What's underlying? So Swami's mind was very, very rajasic and very much centered in attaining to experience and things. And there was a very strong belief system that would provide happiness, and it was at some point unchallenged yet. So it was predominant in activity, but where it was coming from really it was the predominant background. So pretty pure rajas is the predominant background. So there wouldn't be a thought of an action without the accompanying consideration of what would be attained from it. In other words, the background was such that action was unlikely. Now, it happened. So there could be an experience, there could be something that happened, and someone needed help, and there was no thought about what I would get out of it until later. And it would come later about whether I got the proper acknowledgement for it or something. So some sattva there. But in terms of planned activities and such, it had to have some sort of reward according to that background. What does the tamasic background state look like? I just volunteered what a rajasic background state looks like. What does a tamasic background state look like?
Like dull, like none of this really matters. This is it's kind of prevalent.
Yeah, so carelessness.
Yeah, like a hardened heart, sort of like,
right.
Right. Very strong.
Oh, and you would have had that experience at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Homelessness, that was very tamasic because it felt just like I don't care. This is just very dull. There wasn't really a lot going on.
Yeah.
I didn't really want to do anything that day, but I had to.
Right, and that was annoying.
That was annoying, but not enough annoying to get really angry and revved up because I was too tired.
Too tired to be angry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good description of a tamasic background state. So the background state, as it were, is the field in which the activity is occurring.
It's like someone who commits suicide, right?
Yeah.
You would think that doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
I've had enough of this.
Right. Happiness is not for me. Fulfillment is not for me. Doesn't exist here.
Right.
So those thoughts would arise in a primarily tamasic background state. So he speaks of the background of sattvic thought. He says the vast majority of people will always want something concrete to hold on to, something around which, as it were, to place their ideas. Sometimes which will be the center of all thought forms in their minds. That is mind's very nature. A background of thought is needed for fixing the mind. So in a rajasic background, for example, there's not a lot of room for sattvic thought to arise. In fact, generally speaking, when a sattvic thought begins to arise in the tamasic or rajasic background, it will be snuffed out. So, and this isn't judgmental, it's just And so if you imagine, if you just say, where then does that background lead you? Then, let's see. He says, have a sattvic background of thought, of mental image. The mind assumes the shape of any object it intensely thinks upon. If it thinks of an orange, it assumes the shape of an orange, discussion we were just having. If it thinks of Lord Krishna with a flute in hand, it assumes the shape of Lord Krishna. You must train the mind properly and give it proper sattvic food for assimilation. And for those joining us online, keep in mind that the food for the mind is all five senses. So it's not just the physical food, although the physical food does affect it. When we eat hot, spicy food, it makes the mind tend towards rajas, towards more excitement, towards more passion, towards more getting, towards more attainment. And the challenge that we have is in rajas, we're always becoming, but we're never being. And peace and happiness relate to being, not becoming. Excitement is becoming. So adrenaline is becoming. But wherever there is the becoming, there's the excitement, but there is also the crash. So there is this bipolar tendency that exists in the mind with this urge. So for those considering reflecting on, we understand that there is a school of thought that you have to get what you deserve and what you need, and we get it. But we also see where it leads. We have an understanding of yoga psychology, but we've had enough experience to see it, to see what happens. And so, but it is possible to cultivate a different background. And this is what's being shared. Mantra practice, and this is discussed here as well. But mantra practice, when mantra is repeated over and over, and generally when a yogi takes a mantra, in an authentic tradition, the guidance is related to mantra, to repeat the mantra in the mind. The most powerful practice is mental repetition, and all the other practices help to support mental repetition. Why in the world would you repeat it in the mind? Because after some time, 2-3 million repetitions, so a couple of years or so, the mantra actually becomes the background of the mind. The vibration of the mantra becomes the background of the mind. So this is one of the practices. Contemplation on Lord Krishna, on images, sattvic images. He says you must have a sattvic background of thought to take you to the goal, and the goal is salvation. We know that the goal is peace. We know that the goal is freedom. But there are all sorts of ideas in the mind about where it can be attained. And the ideas of attaining freedom through getting something are false. And the ideas of attaining freedom through renouncing action are false. Renunciation is something different from that. So sattvic background helps to take to the goal. It does take to the goal. He says, if you're a devotee of Lord Krishna, have the background of thought, his picture, and the repetition of his mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and his qualities, form, formless qualities, a nirguna upasaka vedanti, nirguna upasaki, so upasaka, a student of Vedanta, going beyond the gunas, should have a background of thought of Om and its meaning, infinite ocean of light, Satchidananda, Vyapaka, Paripurna Atman. Work in the world, and the moment the mind is free, begin to think of the background of thought, either saguna or nirguna, either with qualities or without qualities, background according to taste, temperament, and capacity for sadhana. By constant thinking, a habit in the mind will be formed, and without effort, the mind will run towards the background of thought. So he's talking about how to cultivate a new background of thought, which is sattvic, which is pure, and these different approaches. And really the practices, satsanga, the Raja Yoga practices such as pranayama and pratyahara and asanas, but first and foremost yamas and niyamas, all of these, the bhakti practices, such as relating to the highest in a devotional sense, the jnana yoga practices such as study of scripture and contemplation on its meaning, all of these are really the practices to bring that sattvic background. And in the sattvic background, there's not the tendency to run or the tendency to hide. It is a pity that the vast running rajas, hiding tamas. It is a pity that the vast majority of persons have no ideal, no program of life at all, and no sattvic background of thought. And therefore they're doomed to failure. The background of thought of a young married person, woman or man, is usually lustful. The background of thought of an old mother is affection towards her sons and grandsons. The background of thought of the vast majority of persons is hatred and jealousy. You know that. Even the so-called educated persons with many university qualifications and academic knowledge, which is only husk when compared with spiritual knowledge, have no ideal, no program of life, and no background of thought. So he continues, this having stepped through the philosophy, the physics of thought, and the nature of different thoughts, and the power that the different thoughts have upon us, and all of this, having stepped through all of this, he comes to the point of thought culture and the background of the thought. It's the background of thought that will predetermine the thoughts that are entertained on arising. And so that's really the primary work, is to craft a sattvic background. And we do it in the moment, but that's the goal. You can say the goal is to have pure mind, or the goal is to be completely devoted, however we relate, or the goal is to be completely free of the notion of separation, the feeling of separation, and the idea of being this body or this limited being like this. From here, which we would ask Kartikeya pretty regularly to get up and read, the wisdom thoughts, the four that are shared with us. The first one is, keep your eye always on the goal. So have a clear goal and keep that always in your vision. Okay. Let's read this. After retirement, everybody should have a background of thought and should spend his time in philosophical studies and divine contemplation after retirement. So not for this group yet. But this applies. Old habits of loose thinking must be replaced by cultivating fresh habits of good thoughts. At first, a tendency to think of good thoughts will be formed. By continuing practice, a positive, definite habit of thinking of virtuous, helpful thoughts will be developed. But to have it, you'll have to struggle very hard. So at some point, you stay with it, and even the instinctive, the reactive thoughts that are arising will be of a constructive nature, not destructive nature. They won't be judgmental anymore. They will be uplifting, not trying to put someone down, but working to lift someone up. And they will begin to come more and more automatically. So, and we work for this. It's worth working for. And of course, that nature relates to freedom as well. It says the old habits will try to recur again and again, yes? Till you're firmly established in the habit of thinking of good thoughts only, you'll have to fill the mind again and again with sattvic thoughts, divine thoughts, thoughts on the Gita, Lord Krishna, Lord Rama, Upanishads, etc. You might even have to plaster pictures of the saints and sages all through the vehicle that you're driving and living in. Good job. Because you won't want any thought other than a sattvic thought to enter the mental factory. You won't want any judgment of any other. You won't even want to think of otherness. Yes? And so it will be so important to you that you'll cultivate the environment, what the five senses are engaging in, the outer environment, the food for the mind. So the visual food will be pictures of the saints and sages. The physical food will be sattvic, fresh food. The listening will be of the teachings and the stories of the Buddha and the greats. The tasting, the smelling will also be sattvic. And you won't want anything negative, anything limited, anything judgmental arising. You'll want uplifting only, and so you'll continue to cultivate. And finally, you'll have a mental space where if a judgmental thought even wants to try to arise, you'll catch it so quickly that it won't have any space to take hold. You will have concentration without much effort. He who has subdued his mind beholds in his own self, by the help of his own pure intellect, the immortal, eternal Brahman, which is subtler than the subtlest, which is an embodiment of bliss, peace, and wisdom. It is the contact of the sense with the sense object that gives rise to a mental perception. But if the senses are withdrawn and the mind is stilled, there comes a stage where there is no touch with any sense object. It is the state of bliss and pure consciousness, or nirvikalpa samadhi, which burns the samskaras that give rise to birth and death. Attachment is death. You are attached to body, action, wife, husband, children, property, house, place, and articles that give you pleasure. Wherever there is attachment, there is anger, fear, and vasanas. Attachment leads to bondage. If you want to attain God realization, you must get rid of all sorts of attachment. The first step in detachment is to be detached from the body with which you feel so much identified. The Sanskrit word for the self is Atman. Atman is derived from the root at, or at, which means to go always. Atman thus means that which evolves itself always into names and forms of the universe in order to realize his real essential nature, which is existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute. Okay, Hariom Tat Sat. Would you check to see if we have any comments or questions, Harry? Hey.
Ashira saying we get it again. When we are deeply connected to Samadhi, then the body is nowhere. It doesn't matter. It isn't what is real. Importance is only with what is real.
Oh.
And then someone saying, I have read that Mahatma Gandhi's last words were Ram, Ram, Ram.
Yes. It's true, which indicates the background of the mind. The movie we watched together on one of Ashira's visits here. She had brought it in for us, and the movie is great. It's very, very well done, but they make one mistake, which is they replace his last words with "Oh Lord," as in he's making some plea to the Lord or something like that.
Oh God.
But, yeah, oh God, like, oh God, what's happened, or something like that, which is not the case at all. The The words were simply Ram, Ram. That's what's reported, meaning that he was connected through the repetition of the name of Ram and inside. Oh.
So, do you have a question about the last thought form? Like, say someone had very good thought culture and such, and very virtuous, practices yamas and niyamas, practices, generosity and is very sattvic. Let's say they have some sort of accident, fall off a cliff, and their last thought is, and that's the last.
Well, then the mind is not clear yet. That's all. It's not pure yet. No, I mean, it's not. If you're practicing oneness, but your last thought is of duality, I'm sorry, you're not done yet.
Where would that
Well, if Lord Krishna answers that question, which is, the Lord will put us in the appropriate womb to complete our work. But I will share an experience. It's actually in the book. It's in there. The photograph afterwards is in there, which is that when I was in India, so don't presuppose yourself to have that thought. Here, I'll share the story.
Yeah.
So when I was, I knew that I was going to come back, but I had the opportunity to be back with Swami Premananda in Ganeshpuri for a few months before I flew back to the U.S. for pilgrimage. And there had been, I'd come back to India from Vietnam, where I was serving at the center there. And I was on a bus going up to Ganeshpuri in the mountains. And it was monsoon season. Monsoon season started that day. And it started raining at about 8 a.m., something like that. And it rained for 3 days. And by the time we started encountering some difficulties on the bus. It's a 7-hour bus trip normally. And we started encountering difficulties. And finally, we couldn't go any further. And we got stuck and then had to come back down to Rishikesh. So, and road repairs and such, that was just the first day. There were 2 more days of rain and the roads were falling off the side of the mountains and like that. The Himalayas are relatively young mountains, so they crumble very, very easily, very sharp, jagged, and the roads are built on the side. And up there, the army is doing the road building, so they're very efficient. And but really, literally, the mountain side can be like this, but a road has to come through. So somehow they cut a road into that, and so they were cutting new roads, etc. It was still raining a lot, so I couldn't go for 2 more months. And then by the time I went, I walked up, and I was able to be back with Swamiji for a couple of months. Well, as I was walking up, there was some construction of road, a fresh fall, a fresh landslide, which had taken the road down into the Ganga, down into the river. The road's here and now it's in the river. And so there are cars on both sides. And I was walking, but there was no path to walk because generally the walking path is the road. And some people, and by the way, we're watching, and the construction's going on, and oh my God, this is like this. It's like a 70 degrees, something like that. And this fellow is out there with a grader, working with. He's like right at the edge of the cliff. So brave. I wouldn't say fearless, but so brave. And they're getting closer, and it's clear that in the next couple of hours they'll have it. But there were some people who were walking who were getting very impatient. They said, "We'll go up this way." So we'll go up the mountain. We'll go up the side of the mountain, and we'll go across. And somebody said, "I know the path. I've done it before. We just go up there, and then there's a path straight across, and then we'll come back down." And so there are about 30 people around, 20, 25, 30, like that are talking about it. And I said, okay, I'll go with you. And so we went. We started to go. And after about 30 minutes, and I'm near the back, after about 30 minutes, coming back towards me is the message, there's no way through. We have to go back. And so, okay. So I turn around, and going uphill is one thing. And sandals, by the way. Going uphill is one thing, but coming back down, and everything's wet. It's soaked.
Right.
And so it's very loose. Getting the footing is not so easy. So I'm coming down, and I get next to a cliff, and my feet go out from under me, and I fall off the side of the cliff. And it's about 30 feet. And as I was falling off, I reached this hand back behind me and somehow grasped a bush that was coming up out of the ground. And that stopped my fall. And so I'm there hanging off the side of a cliff. And below me are these pointy trees and big rocks. I say 30 feet, probably 40, like that. I mean, it's definitely something. And I'm there, and I'm looking down, and I'm just laughing. I'm just laughing. There's no fear whatsoever. I'm just laughing. This is the funniest thing. How did I get in this situation, dear Lord? This is the funniest thing. What are you doing here? No, it's all just a play, and it's playing out. And so this fellow comes down to me, and he's all concerned, and he's trying to get me up, and he's got a belt, and he's going to get me up. And he reaches and gets my other arm, which is down here like this. I'm just like that. And he gets this arm, and he starts to pull. But as he's pulling, he's levering this arm in a way where it's going to have to let go. And I said, wait. And I'm still laughing. And he's looking at me like I'm wacky. And other people were as well. You know, here's this guy hanging off the side of the cliff, and he's laughing. And finally, he and someone else were able to get me pulled up without twisting my arm loose from the bush, and got me up and seated, and I'm still sitting. And I'm looking, I'm wearing white, and it's all muddy. And I'm looking around, I look down there, wow. And so I looked down, and I realized, you know, this will happen again very soon, because it's just mud going down. And other people may have their traction and all that, but it's not my thing. I'm not really a walker. I don't really know this stuff. So the idea came, I'll just sit and slide down on my butt like a kid. And so I did. And I'm going, wee! And I'm sliding down. Oh! I slide down, I get to the bottom, I stand up. And the photograph is the back, the kurta, and the white pants, just black with mud. And I have the biggest grin on my face, because what an adventure this has been. And somebody says, can I take your picture? I said, sure. And so they take it with my camera, with the phone. Give it back to me. I look at it later. That's in the book. That picture is in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So don't presuppose the kind of thought that will come. The more there's really a genuine sattvic background, the more there's really a genuine sattvic background.
Right. Okay, we can do it.
No, it's not about that. It's about just engaging in the practice. That's the point. You just cultivate sattvic thought. And you don't presuppose. You don't presuppose anything. You live in the moment, not in some imaginary future or some dead past. You just live in the moment and you keep up your practices. And you don't presuppose and you don't imagine what it's going to be like when you face death, because the truth is you don't die. That's rajasic to even think that. So we talked about studying death. That doesn't mean anticipating your death. That means looking to see what death really is. We discussed that, right? In Tibetan Book of the Dead and all of that. So don't presuppose what that thought will be. Just do the work. And Lord Krishna says, don't worry. You do the work and I'll take care of you. Buddha says the same thing. No worries. Just do the work. Okay, short. Final prayers in Arati, page 174. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushtivardhanam Orvai Rukameva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshiyamam Mritat Om Shānti Shānti Shāntihi. O adorable Lord of mercy and love, let us abide in Thee forever and ever. Humble our Sacred Shivananda Maharaj Ki, for all the saints and sages of all the traditions.